absolute value. I'm going to talk about the graph of absolute value of x and what it looks like and what it means. The absolute value, if you remember the definition, is the distance from 0 to the number. So let's just say I have 10. I am 10 units from 0. Well, if I'm at negative 10, I am also 10 units from 0. That is the definition of absolute value. So when you have something inside the absolute value, it's always going to be positive because you're always talking about units to 0. So let's talk about the graph and what it looks like. The absolute value of x, and this is our origin point 0, 0, looks like a V. It is nonlinear because it does not continue on in a straight line. It hits 0 and then it heads back up, because as I have an equal distance from 0 on both sides, my y, or my result of whatever is occurring with x, is always going to be positive. Regardless if my x is positive or my x is negative, the value of x, my output or my y value is always going to be positive. So this is what the graph of y equals the absolute value of x looks like. Now, let's talk about something a little bit different. Let's talk about the graph of y equals negative absolute value of x. Now, you'll notice the negative sign is sitting outside of the absolute value. So now what it's going to say is, no matter what my x is, it's going to be changed to a negative value, and y is always going to be negative. So it's going to be the opposite of what we looked at before. We looked at the V opening up. Now the V is going to open down. Because whether my x is positive or my x is negative, my output or my final y answer, once I put my x in and I do my multiplication, is going to be negative. So the absolute value makes it positive, whether the x is positive or negative, and then it's going to be always negative because it's multiplied by the negative. It's going to be opening down. There's one more thing we can talk about, and that is a shift on the y-axis. So if I have a y equals the absolute value of x and then plus 2. Okay, now if you remember, when x is 0 now, instead of being 0 and then y being 0, like is in this case, 0 equal to 0, 0, 0 at the origin, when x is 0, y is going to be 2. So y starts at 2 instead of starting at 0. So in this case, there's no negative sign, so it's going to be on the outside, so it's going to be always positive. So we know it's going to be opening up, and it's going to start at positive 2. Okay, and if I had a negative 2, that means I would go down negative 2, and then I would start opening up. Okay, let's look at another situation with the V. We had the V opening up at a standard like this, where it was a 1 for 1. But let's look at what happens when you have y equals 5x. Okay? X is still increasing 1, 2, 3, 4, but the output, or the y equals as a result, is getting faster, it's getting higher than the x. So instead of a 1 for 1, now x is 1, but y is 5, and x is 2, but now y is 10. So you're actually going to end up with a more narrow V as you put a whole number in front of that x. And now let's look at the opposite, or instead of a whole number, let's look at a fraction. So the value of 1/5 x would actually be x is now 1, but y is 1/5. So x is 1, but y is smaller. Then if x is 5, y is 1. So now instead of a narrow, you get this big, wide, fat V. Okay, so this one is 1/5. This is the 1 for 1, and this one is the times by 5. So as you have a whole number sitting in front, you get this skinny V, and as you have a fraction, you get this wide, fat V. These are the characteristics of the graph of the absolute value. So we will recap this here so you can remember. All right, the absolute value of x is positive, the V opening up. The absolute value of negative absolute value x is going to be opening down. Y is equal to the absolute value plus 2 shows a shift change up on the y-axis of 2, and that's going to be opening up because it's positive. And the y equal to 1/5 x is going to be a big fat V, and the y equal to 5x is going to be a really skinny V. Okay, thank you very much. Subscribe and let us know if there's any math questions you have.